Greetings, Mark Goering here, publisher of the Conway Daily Sun. And it's that time of the month, as we say around here, and George Epstein, Sun columnist, Renaissance man.
All those things.
All those things. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Good. And what's today?
It's St. Patrick's Day.
No. Evacuation
Day. So you've got to be a Massachusetts resident or something to be able to truly celebrate. Tell me what Evacuation Day is.
Well, it's when it's either, I forget the name, either General Howe or Gage took off to Nova Scotia when George Washington, the cannons came down from Fort Ticonderoga. They set them up on Dorchester Hill, right?
And they got out of town.
And they got out of town.
Yeah.
And I think it's only in one county. I think it's only Suffolk County in Massachusetts, not the whole state.
Not the whole state? Okay. All right. Yeah.
And they used to, do you think most people know that?
No.
No.
Certainly in America they don't. Even when Echo was serving customers around the country and Columbus Day would come along, which is a big holiday around us, and of course in other parts of the country they refer to Indigenous Peoples Day now and other things, but in the early days of Echo we took Columbus Day off, and it was a beautiful day. Leaves are at their peak, and the rest of the country wasn't happy about Echo's support system and all the rest of it not being in place, and the rest of the country certainly didn't take the day off, and we had to make adjustments, and we always gave a day off, but some people had to cover Columbus Day and they took their day off elsewhere. Yeah.
Interesting. I do have a high-tech question as we get going. But first, let's just start with local, and we'll work our way up to the world stage. So you're the moderator, town meeting. How did it go on Saturday? Madison has a oddball Saturday meeting. Odd day.
Not particularly. There are a lot of the towns choose to have it on a Saturday morning, and the smaller towns that are still traditional town meetings. So it's not at all unusual. Some do it in the evening, some do it the Tuesday of voting, they do it that night, or they actually do it simultaneously. But Madison's fairly mainstream with regard to a traditional town meeting on a Saturday morning. Ours was, as the paper reported, somewhat heated in terms of the kinds of issues that were in place and the level of intensity of feeling that resulted from one particular issue. And I thought we had a wonderful town meeting. The discussion was civil, it was appropriate, it wasn't personalized, it was thoughtful, and it was focused on the issue itself, not on people and accusations.
And what was that issue?
And the issue was that there had been some use of town property by town employees for personal use to some degree. And it was heavy equipment kind of stuff, things that the DPW in town would utilize, and staff members of the DPW perhaps use some of that equipment for personal projects or things like that. And there was a warrant article for $8,000 to hire people to come and investigate the actions that were taken that way. The select board had already voted a policy in place that put an end to that practice. It wasn't like people were doing it sneaky, or at least I don't think so. It was primarily stuff that had been authorized for many years. It was a practice that had gone on.
Right, so someone uses a dump truck on a weekend, or has a trailer to move something personally.
Exactly.
It's a little bit of a good old boy-ism.
It was, and it is. And the result was that the town objected to it, our town attorney objected to it, issues around liability and so on. And so the board voted in place a couple months ago, at this point I think, to put an end to that practice completely. No is no, you can't do it. And the investigation was to explore what the history was, how much of that usage had occurred, who had been involved in approving it, things like that. And the end result was a fairly close vote. It was 80-something to 60-something not to do the investigation, not to spend the $8,000. But the important part was the tone of the debate and the discussion associated with it. There was an amendment that sort of softened it by taking the word investigation out. It would have been done by local citizens. It was that was defeated, but then the harder position of doing the $8,000 investigation was also defeated. And so the town felt that the discussion had been had. Everyone recognized that it was not a good practice to put in place, or the vast majority of people agreed that it was not a good thing. And it's behind the town. And getting people together and having that discussion, have everybody in one place and having everyone have the opportunity to share their thoughts and feelings about it was exactly the kind of result you're looking for from a town meeting. We got together, we addressed it, and put it behind us. And I think genuinely did put it behind us.
Yeah, and I know you're a big advocate of the small d democracy. Is there a big D democracy, small d democracy?
I think we don't want to talk about the Democratic
Oh,
Party.
big D, yeah, right, democracy. See, and I mean, just personally, just as an outside, did you know of any specific abuses? I mean, did you personally know, like,
not direct observation, but I was told by people that this had been done and that had been done. There was an issue with people using some stuff from the dump, from the transfer station, to use as fill at home, and that was viewed as improper. But we would have paid another dump somewhere to take it off our hands. Yeah. So there, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure there was some use privately, and there were some approvals, and there was a selectman who had said, yeah, I told him to go ahead and use this for that purpose. But I was not aware of any situation where people were sort of running a business on the side, using the heavy equipment.
Right. I mean, it just seems as though, and I know when this all came up, and of course we've reported on it, that's a special article, is that you just get new selectmen. I mean, nobody's being accused of stealing $50,000 or something like that. And if you're unhappy, and I think that their Price, your selectman, he took the brunt of it, and I think he's considered just a really good guy. And that was. And I remember. Do you remember when this happened here in North Carolina?
And he was defeated
by Nordland. Nordland was appointed. And
well, there were two people running, 4 people running for 2 slots, and Adam Price did not win. He was the chair of the board, and as you said, took the brunt of this. And 2 people who were not in favor of this use and hadn't been on the board for a long time, they were elected.
And you got Nordland.
Nicole Nordland is
good, and then the new guy,
Joe Dame. And he received the most votes of the 4 candidates, and was someone who I think is and was admired for the amount of homework he was doing as a member of the budget committee and in his pursuit of grants on behalf of the town for things. We have a big expenditure coming up to replace the Silver Lake Dam, which is a bunch of boards right now, and needs to be apparently something more than that. I am no expert, but there's engineering going on. That's a 7-figure expenditure. And so Joe Dame has been out knocking on doors, talking to congressional delegates.
Do you remember when this happened here in North Conway? And the North Conway precinct went through the similar thing?
No.
This was about 20 years ago. And Chandler, who was the superintendent of the town, took the brunt of that.
Yeah.
And I remember a lawyer, and this is at least 20 years ago now, but it is, and everybody in North Conway, of course, remembers this. And it was the same type of thing. And of course, the North Conway precinct's a lot bigger, a lot more money, a lot more equipment. And I remember the lawyer who they hired to investigate sitting in the office saying, the corruption is a mile wide and an inch deep. Meaning nobody was really doing anything.
Right.
But it was just the way it was done for generations. You can use the pickup truck on weekends and stuff. So, okay, can we move on from Madison?
One other thing from Madison. There was a petition warrant article in opposition to gerrymandering that essentially was a resolution to send off to the legislature and to the governor saying, put a stop to this, establish an independent commission. And Madison has always been cranky about that, never really liked dealing with federal, statewide issues and doing these resolutions that are not very specific to the town of Madison. And the town of Madison voted, I saw one hand that came up nay, essentially unanimously in favor of this motion and this resolution. The disgust with regard to the gerrymandering in the state of New Hampshire has reached a point with a group of Democrats, Republicans, Independents, everyone in that room wanted to put a stop to this. Madison in particular is in this bizarre collection of two separate districts with multiple candidates in each one. It goes out to Tufton Borough, it goes down to out to Moulton Borough. It makes absolutely no sense, except that the lines were drawn in a way that it makes the Republican win more likely. And the Republicans drew the lines. Democrats generally are not as good at drawing the lines, but I'm sure they would try to gerrymander it the other way. But it's a ridiculous set of districts, and it's one that is not representative of the people of Madison. Madison has roughly the right number of people to have one delegate just for ourselves. Instead, they've got all these crisscrossing different districts, and it's not right. It's not representative. It doesn't reflect what our 400 person
what do you think
legislature
of, I mean, the one surprise with that, to me the surprise in it was the District 7 race with Bobby Budman and Dale Fincher.
Yeah.
And boy, and it was, because they represent the Flatorial district, and it's Tufton Borough, Wolfboro, and Ossipee, which is red as can be.
Yeah.
You know, and I predicted that Bobby Budman would come close but lose, but she came close and won.
Well, I think the answer is really very simple. It's a lot like the 2016 presidential race and the 2024 presidential race, both of which Donald Trump won, largely because the Democrats put up such terrible candidates. And what the Republicans did was take a free state guy who never lived here and who had a pile of money behind him and came in and sent out horrible, nasty advertisements attacking Bowdman, and from a guy who doesn't live here, never has lived here.
Well, he didn't even register to vote.
Hadn't even registered to vote, and wound up as a write-in, I think, for the primary. If the Republican Party had simply named a reasonably competent local person to run, they would have won, but they simply picked a really horrendous candidate.
I mean, you say he's horrendous, and I actually editorialized on that, and for all those reasons, mostly because I'm not going to support somebody who doesn't bother to register to vote. Sorry, you know, end of story for me, whatever party. But I mean, he's a smart guy and would represent the far right of the Republican Party. So it still was very surprising to me that there were enough crossover votes, and I don't know how the Dems and Republicans split by party in those towns, but I don't know, it gives me a little faith that even in this super partisan world, you know, it's not always 100% partisan.
No, I think the people in those towns deserve credit for actually looking at the candidates, assessing those candidates, and making a decision. You got to remember, it's a special election that occurred on the town election days, and of course the town elections are nonpartisan elections, and don't have Democrats and Republicans when we vote for our selectmen and our school board members, and so it was a different kind of an election rather than the more standard general election, and of course lower turnout. So
you're saying that
a lot of factors.
If you're saying if it was in November, people are voting big D, big R, mostly in presidential.
Well, it'll be a lot harder for the Democrats to hold on to that seat because they only have it until November,
right?
And so it'll be hard for the Democrats.
It'll be interesting
to
see who would run. Who's going to run?
It will. Will Fincher run again against the same candidate, and Bowdman, and how would it come out in that much more heated, much more partisan environment that you'll have in November?
All right, going to move on to Jackson, and there's a couple issues with Jackson. One is the school board. You know, the school board, they voted to, and they negotiated with the town. Oh, it reminds me, I want to ask you what's Madison doing with this ascending town, how they're negotiating with. But anyway, so Jackson decided, they negotiated with the Conway School Board, and they, on their ballot was a choice. You can either go to Kennett or Freiburg Academy, both of which the town of Jackson would pay for. So as a resident, if I was a resident in Jackson, I'm not, who wouldn't want to have a choice, right? Who wouldn't want to have a choice? But on the other hand, gosh, I mean, when there's a lot of accusations about the board members who had kids going to Freiburg, blah, 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 but we have a lot of people on our Conway School Board who have kids in Kennett. So that's an interesting discussion itself. But there's this sentiment that, hey, as much as public, and I always say that, hey, the public, you know, you can complain about charter schools and all that, but you got to look at the reason why people have charter schools, why people are homeschooling, why people are having these choices, because they're not happy with the public system.
Right.
On the other hand, is there a valley-wide obligation to support a public school system? That's the melting pot of, the original melting pot of our society.
So I don't know the answer, and the details in Jackson are somewhat unique to Jackson and to the geography of getting to Freiburg Academy and so on. When I'm going to come back to the town meeting for a minute. When I stand up in front of that room as the moderator and look out at that audience, I'm looking at a whole bunch of people who went to Kennett High School together, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different education backgrounds, and there's a sense of community that comes from a shared educational background, having gone to school together, and a mutual respect. Perhaps there's some dislike, but an understanding of each other. We're neighbors and we have a common history, less so than in some areas because we're a tourist area and there's more turnover, but there's that common basis for our citizenship. And I think there's real value in having everybody's kids, regardless of wealth and backgrounds and jobs and all the rest of it, of the parents, of the kids all sharing that common background and that common experience. So I do value that, and I think that there's a loss when we have people heading off to this charter school, this homeschooling, this private academy in Maine. I think there's something lost there. Having said all that, you're a parent. And you look at that ballot and you say, just as you said, I want a choice. I want the best possible opportunity for my kid, and the best possible opportunity might not be the standard local public school system. And having that flexibility is something I'm okay with. What I'm not okay with is governmental support for some of those decisions around private schools and around.
So you're saying you wouldn't.
But Freiburg Academy is a different situation. It's not the same as a charter school or sending the kid off to Phillips Exeter on the state's dime.
Well, that's the whole voucher education.
Absolutely.
And we've talked about that a lot, so we can put that aside. But if you were on this, but you're saying, yeah, and I said that too, is that if I'm a Jackson parent, I'd want a choice. But it starts at the school board. I mean, if you were on the Jackson School Board, would you have been advocating? I mean, this is not even, this is a private school, but it's out of state.
Yeah, I would.
You would?
I think so. I think that as a school board member, I want to be responsive to the community and the community's desires, and that includes the parents. I want to prioritize what's best for the kids, and it's not up to me to decide, as a school board member even, what's best for the kids. It is up to the parents to decide what's best for the kids. And if you have a solid block of parents, it can be a minority, but a solid block of parents who feel that having a contract that permits them to send their kids to Freiburg, and the town is going to pay roughly the same amount to Freiburg versus Freiburg versus Conway. I think giving people that option is a good idea. So I probably would have voted to support both.
Yeah, where's Madison right now? Do you know? I don't even know.
I don't, and they're secretive about it, which they probably should be in terms of the negotiation process. But I got upset at the deliberative session, because Madison is SB2 for the school, when the school board members indicated that they have no obligation to bring the contract back to the voters to vote on with Conway if they enter into a Kennett contract, or with some other contract that they might want to propose. And I was upset at the thought that they weren't going to do that. Number one, 20 years ago, it came to the voters, and the voters approved a 20-year contract. Now it might be a shorter contract. My understanding is they're looking for the 5-year contract, but it doesn't matter. It's half of our budget. You know, we only have K through 6 in Madison. 7 through 12 all goes to Kennett, the middle school and the high school, and so half of our budget being committed without the vote of the school of the voters, a vote of the school meeting and of the town to support that contract is insane. My belief is that they're backing off of that position, but that gets at one of the threats to our town meetings, which is our town attorneys. The attorney says, and you got to remember, the town attorney, the school attorney, they work for the boards. They do not work for the town. You got to be crystal clear about that. They are hired by the school board or the select board. They are fired. They are paid by the select board, the school board, and they always tilt towards the power of the board because that's who's paying them. And so the school attorney said, oh, you can do whatever you want. You're obligated to make sure the kids get an education. If you want to enter into this contract, you can do that. I was incensed, quite honestly. And that makes it very interesting as far as the timing of the contract and the signing of a contract and the end of the previous contract. So way too much in the weeds probably for our audience here and the amount of time to take, but I would be wild if the school board in Madison signed a contract without the approval of the town.
Well,
I've heard the other towns have been told the same thing.
Well,
go ahead and sign it.
Well, Conway's the same thing. Conway's the same thing. And you say 20 years ago, that's when we had a 20-year contract,
right,
which is expiring in 2027 next year. And actually it was Bill Marvel that brought it up because voters voted on it 20 years ago.
Right.
And the same thing with the Conway School Board. The lawyer's saying you don't have to bring it to the town.
I
mean, it just seems...
It's outrageous.
It does seem a little... Like, what are we doing here?
It's an enormous expenditure.
Right.
It's an enormous pile of many millions of dollars for, certainly for Conway, but even for Little Madison. It's $3-4 million
now
bucks
that
a
you've
year.
lost the SAU, what is it, 13 superintendent, should just fold it into Conway?
It's an interesting story going back to the reason that that Madison, Tamworth, and Freedom left SAU 9 in the first place. They felt the towns were getting lousy service from SAU 9. There was an assistant superintendent who they didn't much like, who was told to take care of the southern towns. They weren't paying the bills on time. We were having vendors call up the school and saying you haven't paid your bill for this or for that because SAU 9 wasn't paying it. At least those were the claims. And the result was, despite the increased cost of having our own SAU, the three towns voted to form an SAU and have had a pretty steady stream of really good superintendents like Mike Whalen, the guy who just left, and some pretty crummy superintendents over the years, because it's a lousy little district with 3 little elementary schools. And so it's very hard to recruit a real superintendent of schools. Having said all that, is it time to move back? Perfectly reasonable thing to do. If people think it's going to save a pile of money, that's not really the case. You still have to have another assistant superintendent. You have all the accounting and bookkeeping needs and probably an extra staff person here. And the staffing in SAU 13 is not a whole bunch of people. Again, and there were some advantages to SAU 13. There was a joint effort for a preschool program that all 3 towns did that was run through the SAU. And there are a lot of shared costs that Tamworth, Freedom, and Madison split. That's just easier to manage because it's all done under the aegis of the SAU. So I think it's an interesting question, but it's probably a perfectly appropriate time to reconsider. The vote for the budget for SAU 13 was defeated in Madison, but in total, Tamworth and Freedom and Madison, you add them all up to determine whether the budget passed, and it did pass by 20 votes across the 3 towns. So I think you have 3 towns that are looking to explore other options. But if Tamworth heads off to some significant degree to Moultonborough, then does it make sense to be part of SAU 9? I think you have interesting questions.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm going to go back to Jackson and to get out of the school stuff. So Eric Mogensen, who bought Black, and we had a story where he's moving his company. He owns Indy Pass, the platform Indy Pass, and skiers know this. Vail has Epic. There's the other one. What's the other one? Icon Pass.
Icon, yeah.
Icon.
That's right.
And then Indy Pass is a group of small skiers around the country, and it's the pass where you can, it's a platform where you can buy ski tickets, season tickets. So he's moving people here, and in the Tech Village has been trying to, and for 25 years now, to bring high tech jobs in, right? And I've always, not that I know anything about high tech, but to me it was always like, the only way we're going to get high-tech jobs is some guy who owns a company moves here, likes it, and brings their employees. So, and that's what Eric is doing, right?
Yep.
And he's bringing 30 employees, and they're all probably youngish, and they're all highly skilled in the digital world, good salaries. And the only person I can think of who did a similar thing is you.
Different. I started it here.
Okay, okay. I mean, okay.
That's a significant difference because there are different set of challenges to recruiting, finding recruiting and building a team here with the starting
All right, so that's
population. But go ahead. Yeah,
no,
sorry.
I guess that's what I'm asking is that as the grandpa of
great-grandpa,
local high-tech entrepreneurs, how many employees did you guys have?
Well,
I know
we got up around 100, but 80, 85
here.
people. No, so there were about 50, 55 people here.
Okay, and that was just sort of to remind people on the Four Corners in Conway.
Right.
That's that building that was in the 80s was actually retail.
It was.
We're dating ourselves. You bought it apparently.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that's where your headquarters was, and now it's being repurposed for apartments.
Yeah.
You know, not a bad spot in my view. Although it's you're downtown. Okay, we don't go there. You're not gonna
I'm not
you're not gonna be
enthusiastic,
applying
but
for a rent.
that's fine.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fine.
So, any advice for Eric with that? Because the other thing is that, and we asked him, housing's tough around here, and he says, well, housing. They're from Colorado.
Right.
It's average $500,000 here. It's $900,000 in Colorado.
No, advice, no. Simply confirmation that it's likely to work out great. People like working here. People will make an effort to come here in order to be able to live in our community, in our environment. It's a great place to recruit. Not everybody. There are people who don't want to come work here. It's too isolated. It's too rural. But there are lots of people who really want to come work here. And this is an attractive place to attract the kind of people that he needs, and people with good skills. And if you pay them, then the issues around the current challenges associated with housing and so on are no different than they'd experience many other places around the country.
This is a crystal ball question since we're talking about the economy, but it does seem as though, we go through these little bumps, right? We went through the condo boom in the 80s, and then the big box boom in the 2000s, and then we had the whole little hotel boom, right? I mean,
yeah.
We grow, but then there's those kind of little bumps or bubbles, and boy, we're heading into, a housing unit change, and literally, we talked about this, and I guess I'm asking you what you think is going to. Where do you think the valley is going to be in 5 or 10 years? There are literally 500 or 600 housing units that are coming online. Apartments. I say housing units because they're apartments or this or that.
Yeah.
And that's substantial. I mean, that's a lot of people. Have you been back at TJ Maxx to see that?
I haven't gone back. I know the numbers.
It's like a 200. I mean, it's
200.
It's
Yeah.
impressive. It looks like something in Dover. Like a big apartment complex. It's with a clubhouse and a swimming pool.
Yeah. Well, pendulums swing, and we've gone through a period of really reducing, for example, our traffic problems. We've had a big decline in the number of students we have in our schools, obviously. We've been just talking about. So things are going to swing back. You are going to have more traffic problems. Route 16 is going to become more and more problematic. Avesta and behind TJ Maxx and all that stuff is going to create a lot more activity up and down the road. How many of those units will be for year-round residents and are going to be taken up by year-round residents? I can only guess at that. I don't know. It's got to be a significant percentage, but I don't have any idea. But there's going to be a population impact. That impact will occur in the school system. Residential construction is going to increase the tax burden in Conway. And to the degree that how these contracts are written and so on, it can affect all the surrounding towns as well. But Conway's going to have some challenges. Conway's going to have policing challenges. Conway's going to have traffic problems. Conway's going to have tax problems because you're going to have a growth of population and not a proportionately large increase in the assessed value of the town.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. We Conway Police Chief Chris Matty was in promoting a hockey game that they're doing, a promotional hockey. And he was saying that, and this is, I guess, in one sense obvious, but when he said that the police force would be half the size
Right.
if we didn't have the tourists on weekends.
Well, that's where the $2
Hotel
pillow fill
right.
fee is, and again, our state legislature, tough luck. We don't want local control. We don't want towns to be able to decide they can charge $2 no matter what the impact is of tourism in that particular community, and no matter how much money we as a state rake in as a result of the tourism in the Conway area. We're getting killed, and we're getting killed by a legislature that is made up of a lot of so-called libertarians who are the last and least libertarian people on earth. They want control in Concord. They want as little control occurring in our towns and cities as they can possibly limit it to. They are fierce, power-hungry people. And
so let
me give you an example. So a crazy example. So some person, I won't say even the gender, some person in some town, not anywhere around here, put a warrant article, got a petition warrant article, got 25 signatures and put it on, and got up to speak at town meeting, and the town meeting had a limitation of 1 minute or 2 minutes for someone to speak in that situation. The person wasn't done. They needed more time. And the moderator said, nope, that's not permitted. We have a 2-minute limit for our speech. So the person went to a state legislator, a free stater, and said, I was cut off. That's not right. I'm not allowed to do that. And so the state legislature and the governor passed a law that said that anyone who brings a petition warrant article to town meeting has the right to speak for 10 minutes. For 10 minutes on that topic, and no one can stop them from doing it, no matter what the rules of the town meeting are. I'm crazed that the people in Concord, that our state legislators would dictate to our community what the rules of our town meeting should be, and should allow some space cadet, it might be, I don't have any idea, but some individual to suck up 10 minutes of town meeting. And if you had 7 of those petition town articles, your whole meeting gets sucked up by these people babbling away. Nobody needs 10 minutes to explain a warrant article.
You need 10 minutes when you explain your stuff here.
I have so much wisdom to share in so little time, but as a town moderator, you've got to keep your audience. And you've got to make it reasonable as far as your expectations, how much time they sit there. And you do the same thing in the United States House of Representatives. You do the same thing in the state House. You place limits, and not 10-minute limits for these people talking about stuff that
Well, speaking of government, we're going to move on. We'll get back to some state stuff.
Yeah.
But speaking, we're talking about elections and so forth. It's the Save America Act.
Yeah.
And that's being debated, and the Republicans are pushing it in the U.S. Congress. And based on its face, it's like, hey, you need voter ID. But it's way more, it hasn't been worked out, but it's way more than that.
Yeah.
There's some saying that you have to provide your birth certificate for mail-in votes.
Right.
You have to, and where do you find, who has a lot of people don't have birth certificates, they couldn't find them, or passports, right? So, and the other thing that gets me is that, and you can answer this, like the Republicans are proposing this, but they won the House, they won the Senate, they hold the White House. I mean, I could see that if it was the Democrats had won that and the Republicans are saying, oh, the election was stolen, so we need these new controls. But I don't get it.
Oh, it's very simple. I mean, both parties try to suppress the vote to some degree of people from the other party. New Hampshire is the better example. I'll come back to the SAFE Act. Well, just quickly with regard to the SAFE Act, the issue with the SAFE Act to me isn't necessarily the specific components of it, although we don't really know what they are and there's still an awful lot to learn. It's the whole idea that suddenly the federal government, and as you say, a federal government controlled by one party is going to control elections, thereby attempting to keep control of the government. So our Constitution is very clear. The states are in control of the process for voting and their own elections, and they should be left to do that, with the exception of constitutional questions of people of various races having the right to vote.
Yeah, and
so
poll
on.
taxes and the things, the
exactly.
Civil Rights Act.
So the federal government shouldn't be doing it. So the SAFE Act is just wrong. It's SAVE Act is simply not the right thing, and hopefully not necessarily by this Supreme Court would be ruled unconstitutional. But you have New Hampshire with now a pretty long history of the Republicans in the House and the Senate trying to stop college students from voting. Who are you to say where someone lives if they spend more than half their year here? Why in the world should you be in a position to say you can't vote in the state that you live in? And it's very black and white. It's simply to say, gee, a lot of college students are going to vote for Democrats. We don't want them to. Years ago, the Democrats tried to create, they never had control, but they tried to create barriers to absentee voting. And this was a ways back, but they didn't like absentee voting because the absentee voters in New Hampshire were largely old people who went to Florida and voted absentee, and they voted Republican because old people vote Republican and young people vote Democrat. And so Democrats would try to put barriers up for absentee voting, and Republicans very aggressively are trying to stop anything that looks like a college student being allowed to vote in New Hampshire. I lived in New Hampshire, and I was a college student, and this was my home, and I never left it, and I wasn't allowed to vote till I was 21 because of the law back in, that's how old I am, but I would have been blocked under the proposals that are in place by the Republican majority. Leave people alone. Voting is a right. And if people live somewhere, they should be able to vote there.
Yeah, and John Sununu reminded me of this, is that in New Hampshire you do, so one thing is that you can't vote. Now, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you can't vote, right?
Right.
But in New Hampshire, you do have to provide proof of citizenship to register, which I didn't know. This is John Sununu.
And that's new.
That's new, and it's only a couple years old, and it's
Right.
New Hampshire specific. But the old rule is, like, people would say, well, why not, right? But the old rule is that you still can't vote if you're not a citizen, and you have to sign to say that I'm a citizen, and then it's up to the towns to check it out. It's against the law. Basically, what I'm saying, it's against the law to vote if you're not a citizen.
You used to sign a piece of paper, an affidavit, when you registered, and it had a $500 fine and a jail term if you lied. And you check the box that says I'm a citizen. Did you have any problem? No. Were there people who were non-citizens voting? I don't know of a single non-citizen who ever voted in New Hampshire. I know of a handful of situations, five, over the past few years where people have been caught
Voting
in two places, typically in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire.
Those liberals.
Well, the one that happened in Madison was a Republican.
Yeah.
And he wanted to get, I don't know, but may well have wanted to get two Trump votes in place. And so this is so not a problem. It is simply a barrier to people voting, and putting barriers to people voting stinks.
Right, and the other thing about the Save America Act is that it would also mean that the states would be required to turn over their voting rolls, their voting information. And to give Ayotte credit, the president has already pushed for that in New Hampshire, and she's pushed back.
Yeah, and it's not, the reason they want those names is not for the purpose they're claiming, that we're trying to eliminate people voting illegal. The reason they want those names is to have a powerful Republican database that they control that gives them access and communications tools to reach out to those people and pursue them for their votes, for their money. That's how that'll be used, and that's where Palantir and these other companies that are so closely tied to the party have become such valuable companies, have such huge federal contracts, primarily for law enforcement and military contracts, but these are companies that are amassing immense amounts of data on human beings, Americans.
When I wrote an editorial basically not endorsing Bobby, although it was really against Fincher.
Right.
And but I said that it's kind of like the classic thing Republicans say: we can't vote for anybody. We want to support Republicans who are going to be against the income tax and broad-based tax. And I said in the editorial that that ship has sailed. Democrats would never say we're for income tax, and sure enough,
yeah, blew it. Shot themselves right in the foot.
No. But there's a new from what's his name,
Right.
Volinsky, the 3.3. So all of a sudden it's back on the table.
And so that's what I mean by shoot yourself in the foot. The Democrats and the Democratic Party is dumb. And to take something that was finally, as you said, pretty much off the table. It was not an issue that anybody took seriously. Nobody felt that it was a threat. All of a sudden it's back on the table, and now the Republicans have this wonderful topic to run against.
What about it's called, I guess it's 3+3, and it would be 3% income tax and 3% over the value of your house over a certain amount. But they're big. It's like 3% of your income tax, but you get like a $50,000 year deduction. And then on the house, it's the same thing. It's like up to 500,000, or it's 250,000, or whatever. On its face, most people, I think, would agree with it on its face, because you pay less property tax, and a lot of people, as we know, people, particularly retirement, that's where all their value is, and they're paying these incredible property taxes. The danger, of course, is that you open the spigot, because now the state's controlling the money, and all I have to do is ratchet up both the income tax and that percentage on real estate tax.
It's one more threat to town governance and town control, and it's fair to point that out. What you said may or may not be true as far as whether most people would benefit from it, or the majority of people would benefit from it. It's a complicated question. Our country's income levels and the aging of the people of New Hampshire have really changed those numbers. So all of a sudden you're creating a situation in which the young people that we need in New Hampshire to come here and work and to get paid well, because we need their money to take care of us old people. We need them paying into Social Security, paying into Medicare, which we're not doing anymore. We're simply grabbing the money out of Social Security and out of Medicare. So we need these young people, and they're the ones who will get hit by an income tax that there is a reduction on their property tax side, but they're the ones who are going to get hit hardest on the income tax side, and it's going to be the old folks like us who benefit the most by reduced property tax costs, because we have lower incomes, but we might have higher property values. So it's an interesting study in economics as to who benefits, who doesn't, what populations benefit, what don't. But the people of New Hampshire's made it very clear, we don't want an income tax. I mean, it's not been close. Is this really something that the Democratic Party is going to win on? Are they going to change the hearts and minds? Maybe, but not in my lifetime.
No, and I think a lot of Democrats, this wasn't proposed by a leading Democrat either. It was a lawyer, Volinsky, who was the Claremont decision guy and all that. So,
but his core mission is to say that education funding in New Hampshire isn't right.
Right.
And that's a very hard thing to disagree with. The fact that the people of Berlin have to charge themselves 4 times as much per dollar of property as the people of Moultonborough, and they have 1/3 as much in the amount of money they have available to spend on education after they're busy clobbering themselves with property taxes. It's a very rough state to be in if you pick the wrong town to live in. And the inequities of education funding in New Hampshire are just as inequitable as the range of wealth in our community.
See, one of my predictions for the next few years is Jackson populations are going to explode, because not only can you move there and have lower property taxes because they have so much property up there, but then you can send your kid to Freiburg.
But you're but you're an economics guy, and you know that as
Thank you.
I respect it. As the property taxes stay down low and the services remain very good, and it becomes a more attractive place to move to, then the property costs will go up, and it will become more and more expensive to live there. And so it is absolutely true that what you're going to turn Jackson into and what it arguably already is, and Molten Borough and these other valuable towns, they're going to become enclaves of wealth, and you're going to have an even greater divide between the wealthy communities and the poorer communities. The poorer communities are going to accumulate people who can afford to live there, and the wealthy communities are going to accumulate people who can afford to live there, and you're going to have less of a mix of people in different economic statuses. That's not healthy. There's nothing good about that.
No, but cities have been segregated, not by race, but by income forever, right?
Yeah,
you live in a good neighborhood, you live in a bad neighborhood.
And who thinks that's a good idea? And
it's the way it is, though.
Well, and so you're going to policing. If you leave our country, but also in our, if you go to Florida, the walled enclaves that people have, the people who are hiding behind walls because they live in communities that are very diverse and where there are concentrated areas with wealthy people, and the poor people are on the outside. They build walls and they hire their own local police departments. Their schools and their kids do not go to the public schools. That's not healthy for America. It's not healthy for democracy, small d.
No, it's true, but that's the way that's human nature. We like to be in our similar groups of people like us.
But you don't create public policy that drives things in that direction. Our tax system has taken our middle class that we had in the 50s and 60s, that really grew in the 50s and 60s, and squished it and increased people on the low end and really increased the wealth of the people on the highest end. And so our public policy decisions are creating greater and greater wealth inequities. And that means more anger, more tension, more violence. All those things arise. You go back to the Gilded Age of the 1890s and the early 20th century, and the amount of revolutionary activity, the governor of Colorado being assassinated, and John Pierpont Morgan bomb being set off in his office, and people trying to stab him, and the amount of violence of poor versus rich was enormous during that area. The Pinkertons versus the strikers in the coal mines. This was a very violent country, much more so than it is today because of that wealth inequity, and we're heading down that road. This is a big problem.
Yeah, well, we just didn't have many laws either. I want to bring back the days where, was it Sumner who's whacked a guy in the...
No, he was the one who got whacked,
He was the one who got whacked?
Yeah, I think so.
In the Senate of the Congress with a cane?
Yeah, I mean,
so
nearly killed.
Yeah, so here's a high-level socioeconomic question. Why is it the wealthy people in Molten Borough are conservative and the wealthy people in Jackson are liberal, generally?
I don't know the answer, but it depends on the issues that you're confronted with. The people of Jackson, maybe I'm wrong, it's just a complete guess, but the people of Jackson, I think, are more embedded in their community, more active in their community, have been there longer. Maybe it was with a second home initially, but a lot of them have moved there, but more of them live there year round, whereas Molten Borough is still very much a tourism town with lots of people who are part-time living there. You have the big enclave of Mormons. I don't want to get into religious issues, but Mormons and the state of Utah are very conservative, very Republican, and you have a large population of Mormons in Molten Borough. So you have a lot of demographic issues that I think are different between the two. But it's a good question.
Yeah, no, I don't know, of course, but I think, Jackson used to be super conservative.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Ray Abbott days and all that, and it's totally changed 180 degrees. And I think in Molten Borough, if you live in the lake, you want a big house on a lake and a giant boat, I think it's a different sensibility of people who move to Jackson. I think that Jackson much more, they drive Priuses, they don't have giant cars, they like the outdoors more, even though Molten Borough's rural too. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by Molten Borough still being more of a tourist community. Jackson, an enclave of some wealth, but much more embedded in their own community and in the Mount Washington Valley.
All right, okay, so we only have 10 minutes to go. So let's do a little national review. I think your column last week was about us getting into all these wars, right, over the many times. And we know we stumbled into Vietnam, we stumbled into Iran, we've stumbled here, stumbled there, and all of a sudden we get a new imperial presidency, basically, and gunboat diplomacy. And we've taken over, I mean, Venezuela. And the president just today is saying, I'm going to take Cuba. Right? So he's got another one, you know, and on its face, it's get rid of these bad guys. Now in Iran, of course, the same thing. It's a little more complicated over there. We can discuss the, you know, and everybody says the military's done great in Iran, which they have, and we have this incredible military, and we're showing the world that we're a level above. What do you think? What's going to happen? If you had to guess what's going to happen in Iran?
Lots of I don't knows in this interview. Just to comment on Venezuela for a minute, the government of Venezuela hasn't changed.
Right.
We arrested, grabbed, kidnapped, whatever you want to call it, the boss, but it's still run by the same people. We've stolen as much oil as we can, but apparently a judge is holding them up. We can't sell it, and we're spending millions of dollars a day to maintain that oil somewhere in boats around. I'm pretty convinced that the grabbing of the oil and the control of the oil had nothing to do with drugs. Venezuela was not a high impact country in terms of drugs in the United States. Drugs elsewhere, but not particularly drugs, and certainly no significant fentanyl, which is the killer drug here. So that was always a ridiculous reason. I'm pretty convinced that Marco Rubio is the key to Venezuela. He is Cuban American and ran on and got elected as a U.S. Senator in Florida as hawk when it came to Cuba, to try to be as hard on and force Cuba to overthrow the government that was there. And by withholding the Venezuelan oil that kept the lights on in Cuba, Cuba's economy was already pretty collapsed and is now completely collapsed. And there was that secondary result that Cuba is very much in danger of collapse and is probably a big part of the motivation for the Venezuelan activity that we had there. What's going to happen in Venezuela? Why isn't the government that was really elected there in place instead of Maduro's number two?
Rodriguez now.
There's no excuse for any of that. And all that's going to leave us with, as those previous things that I mentioned in my column, the things we did over the years, it's going to leave us with an angry group of Venezuelans. Venezuela is not going to appreciate what we did there. Whether Cuba does or not, that's an interesting question. I don't know the answer.
A lot of Cuban Americans. I mean, Miami's so much Cuban, and it's you know, I know Obama. I always thought that, and not to be partisan about this, but Obama basically relaxed all the travel to Cuba and all that, and just build some hotels
things opened
there.
up and might have morphed into a warm and fuzzy kind of situation.
We just want to go there for the hotels and beaches and some drinks.
That's right. And if you watch Godfather 2, you know that the mafia largely ran Cuba. Under the Batista regime in the 50s. Castro, leaving that aside, looking at Iran, you have a situation in which you have so many competing sets of motivations. Why are we there? I don't know. The president claimed that he had decimated, destroyed, obliterated the nuclear program that was in Iran back in this past summer. Clearly that's now not the case. Marco Rubio said it was the fault of the Israelis. They were going to do it anyway, and so we had to join in. I've never heard of anything quite like that. You have the negotiators with Iran, Jared Kushner in the lead, who's out soliciting and receiving billions of dollars from the Saudis and the UAE and the Qataris. Billions of dollars, and these are countries that are Sunni Muslims that oppose the Shiite Muslims in Iran and wanted this kind of a war to occur.
Well, Netanyahu,
and of course Netanyahu,
40 years has wanted to attack Iran.
Absolutely, and so. Is it a bad outcome if the Iranian government is overthrown by a bunch of warm and fuzzy Democrats in Iran? No, but you got to go back. 1953,
Right.
the CIA overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran, the Mossadegh government, Mossadegh, I don't know how to pronounce it, and announced it. Kermit Roosevelt was a Roosevelt family member who was the head CIA guy. We overthrew this government. We put the Shah in place because he would be more anti-communist than the democratically elected government. And the Shah put Savak in place, his
Very repressive.
secret police, and started kidnapping, killing, torturing people, and did so for decades. And the Iranian people hated us for it. And as a result, they took over the embassy when there was enough strength behind the Ayatollah Khomeini, the original one, and they took our whole embassy hostage, and you had that horrible situation where Carter's weakness and failure to be able to respond, and Reagan's corruption is the way I'll describe it, but his secret negotiations with the Iranians saying, wait till I get elected and then let the people loose. It was very creepy stuff. And then sold weapons to the Ayatollah in order to fund a secret war in Nicaragua, and the Nicaraguans still hate us as a result of our support for the Sandinista, the death squads that were fighting the Sandinistas there. We've done so many stupid things that were apparently short-term good ideas and turned out in the long term to really damage our relationships, damage our image in the world, made many, many people around the world view us as a colonial power, as simply somebody who's happy to overthrow anybody as long as we get the kind of results that we want in that country. And we don't have to do that. And so what will the outcome be there? Boy, I think it would be great if the Ayatollahs were thrown out of the Iranian government, and that the people rose up and established a democratic regime, stopped their threats against not just Israel, but at their other Arab neighbors, put a stop to it. I think it would be great if that was the outcome. Is that the likely outcome? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. We are in the age of Trump, good, bad, or indifferent for the last 10 years, and it's important. I mean, he's going to rank up there in terms of the effect that we've on this country as much as really Lincoln or FDR. I mean, I think it's.
I would think more Andrew Jackson, but I'm okay.
Well,
I understand what you're
I think
saying.
in terms of how our relationships with the world and what's happening in Russia. I mean, it just seems interesting to me is that I still think Trump is motivated by personal relationships. And the fact that he doesn't support Ukraine very much because he doesn't like Zelensky, and he kind of seems defers to Putin all the time for whatever reason, and Netanyahu's very close
Who's
with.
the biggest beneficiary of the
Russia.
war in Iran? Yeah, I mean, their oil prices are sky high, and the money's pouring in.
Right.
So yeah, you gotta recognize the ramifications of what you do, and we have a federal government that doesn't seem to recognize anything big picture, any of the ramifications of their decisions.
Hey, so we'll finish up on baseball. You watching the World Baseball thing down?
No.
Okay. Well, the finals. It's a nice tournament, I guess you'd call it. So the finals is America, us. Today, I think they're playing, or tomorrow, versus Venezuela.
Yeah.
So wouldn't that be ironic if Venezuela? That we're playing Venezuela in the finals.
No question. And who will the rest of the world root for? That would be the interesting question. The Olympics, get rid of 3/4 of the events and find a way to take some of the money and corruption out of the Olympics, and I'll start watching that again. What a horrible, horrible, horrible experience it is. It's just awful. And doling out those gold medals by having the same basic events over and over again, having events where people hold up 9s and 10s or 6s or whatever it is that are not sports but simply exhibitions where you can't tell who won until some judge tells you who won. These aren't sports. In 1924, I think it was 24, the Paris Olympics included painters who lined up along the Champs-Élysées and painted paintings. And the judges decided who the winning painters were, and they gave out gold medals to them. What is the Olympics? The motto says higher, faster, stronger, or faster, higher, stronger. Run faster, swim faster, ski faster, jump higher, jump longer, be stronger, lift bigger weights. Make these real events that are athletic competitions, make us proud again of the Olympics. Start over again.
Boy, bring back painting. I think that's
No, it's just the opposite. We're heading down that road.
Take care. Good to talk to you.
You too.